Am I right?
Yes.
And what have you noticed?
Some versions do not include verse 53 of chapter 7 through verse 11 of chapter 8.
Right,
But on my version, it's actually a footnote at the bottom of the page.
right, right. The story of the woman caught in adultery apparently was not originally in John's gospel. It's not found in the oldest manuscripts, and it's not found in, as the outline says, the best manuscripts, meaning the manuscripts with the best authority. In the days of hand copying, there was a whole different kind of reality that people dealt with. And you've seen in all of the movies, whether it's the emperor or king or queen or some kind of official, the use of sealing wax. Anybody ever seen a movie before? Raise your hand. Do you know what I'm talking about? Well, the reason that was so important was to verify where something came from. And so anyway, you have these manuscripts. You know, Ruth has a copy of the Gospel of John. Marion has a copy of the Gospel of John that's hand copied. And Ruth has the story of the woman caught in adultery, and Marion doesn't. But they both know that Marion's is the older, more closer to the original copy. The other thing is that this story also shows up in some manuscripts in the Gospel of Luke. After chapter 21, verse 38, or 24:53, or after John 7:36, or 21:25. Now, one of the things that's interesting about that is that second location in the Gospel of Luke and the third location that it turns up in John makes this a resurrection story instead of where it is here. That being said, the explanation, you can tell that chapter 7 ends with everybody going home, right? While Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. And then you can just keep reading. You can skip the story of the woman caught in adultery and go right to, again, Jesus spoke to them saying in verse 12. Okay? But this is a wonderful story. So unlike some commentaries that you can go to, they won't talk about this because it doesn't show up in all the John manuscripts. So let's just move on. I mean, I understand that, but it's such a good story. So let's spend some time on it. Early in the morning, Jesus came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." Okay. Now, there are a couple red flags right away with this. Okay?
What if somebody ran in and said he condemned her?
What if somebody ran in and said he condemned her?
Yes, he said, has anyone condemned you? And she said, no. I mean, how would that change the story at all?
I'm not sure I understand. How do you think it would change the story?
I don't know.
I think what Jesus means is when he laid down the challenge, whoever among you is without sin, get the ball rolling by throwing the first stone. Nobody was willing to do that. And so then Jesus just uses a different word. Everybody left. Nobody was willing to throw the first stone. Nobody was willing to step out from the mob. Okay? All right, back to my question of the two red flags. Anybody know what they are? I mean, there might be more, and I'm just saying there's two red flags that come up for me immediately.
What was he writing on the ground?
That's not a red flag, that's a question.
Okay.
The first red flag is that's pretty convenient that Jesus happens to be in the temple with a crowd of people teaching, and they just happen to have a woman that is caught in the very act of adultery to bring in and set in front of him to try and trap him. Now, what's the French phrase? Anybody here well read on the saucier side of life? In flagrante delictio, or what? Anybody do better than that? With that than me? Anybody know what it means? Anybody ever read a book? Anybody seen a movie? Anybody read a book?
No.
It's a French phrase for flagrantly delectable, or whatever, where somebody is caught in the very act. En flagrante delicto. I think that's what it is. Anyway, I was a classics major, but as they say, French bears nothing more than a passing resemblance to Latin. And that's a highbrow classicist joke. Anyway, sorry. Okay, so on the one hand, how is it that they just happen to have a woman to bring in, caught in the very act of adultery, to put in front of Jesus and in front of all these people to try and trap him? How would you arrange that? Connie? Well, the possibility that's been suggested is that it was a setup. That the occasion of the affair was a setup specifically for the purpose of some kind of goon squad going in, grabbing the woman, and taking her in front of Jesus. All right, that's one red flag. What's the second red flag?
Where's the guy?
Where's the man? Oh, well, anybody know the answer to where the man is?
Double standard.
And what kind of specific double standard is at work here?
Men can get away with it.
Exactly, because according to Mosaic law, there were instances in which the man could not be guilty of adultery unless he had violated another man's property.
Oh.
That's right.
Unless she
It's
belonged to somebody
just like,
else.
what?
Unless she belonged to somebody else.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's a pretty significant double standard. Not just the way that some of us experienced a double standard and maybe still do. But, okay, so the second red flag is, where is the man? The whole point of that is then that there's a double standard, as was mentioned, but also, what is the real concern? What's the real concern on the part of the people who want to know where Jesus stands?
They probably wanted him to follow the law that they're familiar with.
Okay. The problem is that this is one of those situations where no matter what Jesus would say, he would be in trouble with somebody. What if Jesus said, "You're right, Mosaic law says to stone her," then what?
Then his followers would.
What?
Then his followers would think he wasn't being true to himself.
Okay, if they expect Jesus to always be forgiving and merciful, the other issue though is whatever the prescription in Mosaic law that called for capital punishment, the Jewish people didn't have the authority to do that, as we will find later on. That's the whole way that they get Pontius Pilate and the Romans involved in crucifying Jesus. Pilate says, "Take him yourselves and crucify him," and they say, "We don't have the authority. We don't have the authority to execute people for capital crime." So the ball goes back in Pilate's court. So if Jesus said, "Yes, let's stone her right now," then he would be in trouble with the Romans for inciting civil disobedience. If he says no, then he is contradicting the law of Moses. Okay, are you with me? And you're with the plotters on this, the people who plotted. Now, I mean, we're in a political season, and that happens all the time, doesn't it? I mean, it's just like with the kids down at the border. Isn't that an opportunity to put a microphone in front of somebody and a camera in their face and ask them a question? And no matter what you say in response to the question about the kids down on the border, somebody can use that against you from some angle, right? And we have issues like that all the time. All right, so now the point of that example is, then if I put a microphone in Jim's face and my cameraman is on him, do I really care what Jim's position is and the reasoning behind it? Do I really want that information? Or am I looking for him to trip himself up? Because that's the name of the game. So, when they ask Jesus these questions, it's not because they respect his authority as a teacher. Okay, so then the question there, if you take the focus off of Jesus and the woman caught in adultery, and you put it on these people that have possibly set this whole thing up, and then you ask them the question, where are you in your relationship with God? What's the answer? I'm sorry, you're lost?
Yeah, I'm lost.
Okay. If you focus on the people
Yeah.
who brought the woman in front of Jesus and want to trap him in the question, what should be done with her? Okay. If you take Jesus out of the equation, you take the woman out of the equation, and you just focus on the people who are coming at Jesus, okay? My question is, where are they in their relationship with God? I want to turn that whole question around to them and say, where are you in your relationship with God? In the same way that somebody that wants to trap Jim in his answer to what we should do about the kids at the border, I want to ask them, where are you in your life in terms of other people? You with me? Anybody? How about everybody else? Do you know what I'm saying about those people? Where are you in your relationship with God? If your main concern about Jesus is to try and trip him up, where are you? If you would manufacture an adulterous liaison for the purpose of being able to bust in and take the woman and put her in front of Jesus so you have a living prop for that question that you want to try and trap Jesus in, where are you in your relationship with God? Are you with me? What's the answer to that?
Weren't they Jews? Weren't they mostly Jews?
Yes.
Who would be following the law of Moses?
Yes. So is that what we're just concerned about following the law of Moses.
Yeah.
We're just concerned about being law-abiding. Is that right?
Well, no, because they turned away when he said to cast the first stone if they were without sin.
Okay.
He spoiled their plans.
In the first place, the people that show up the next morning, I would suspect that those who are there or show up are basically Pharisees. That these are church or elders.
Scribes and Pharisees brought a
Because
woman.
other people who had to go to work. So who's available to be sitting there in the morning? It would be these people who apparently are plotting to set Jesus up. So it's a negative group directing Jesus.
Mhm.
I can't think of the word. But they definitely were not of the same thought that Jesus were.
Well, they didn't want to believe in Jesus. You know, they were from the old school, so to speak.
Right.
And they're still challenging, they don't really believe in Jesus yet. They're questioning, they're doubting him. The Jewish people still don't believe he came. Is my understanding.
Okay, so then the question is, if you are convinced that this individual is not the Messiah, what would be the faithful response? Would the faithful response be to try and discredit the person any way you could?
Yeah.
Or put forces into motion that would result in his execution? Would that be the holy thing to do?
Well, and
The
then
God-pleasing thing to do?
all of a sudden, nobody threw a stone. And now, their eyes are being opened in a different way.
Right. And so we see this over and over and over again. We see the attempts that people have to box Jesus in and trip him up, end up blowing up in their face. Right?
Yep.
It doesn't ever work out the way they think it's going to.
But even today, people try to discredit him.
Uh-huh. And
What? But we believe.
yeah, so people try to discredit our faith, but we believe. And so do we go put a group together and go try to kill those people that want to discredit our faith?
No, well, they do over in the Palestine and Israel.
Yeah, I guess it depends on your address, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Which, any of that, in all seriousness, any of that really raises questions about what's your faith all about? I mean, some of you might remember back in the previous class that I taught the 4 questions about what is the character of your God, what is the content of your faith, what's the purpose of your prayer, what's the function of your church, or whatever religious group you have. What is the character of your God? Well, if you have an angry, bloodthirsty God, then that's how your angry, bloodthirsty God operates in the world. If you have a faith that the content of my faith is I'm right and you're wrong, and either you're going to get right or you're going to get dead because I have an angry, bloodthirsty God. And the purpose of my prayer is to thank God that I'm on the right side and to pray for swift punishment for all of you that are on the wrong side. And the function of my church, my community of faith, is for all of us to get together and pat each other on the back for how wonderful we are to be on the side of the bloodthirsty God. Now, I'm seeing some frowns out there. Is that a little extreme?
Well,
I don't think it is.
No, not.
How many places in the world do we find right now?
that-
How many places in the United States of America do we find right now people who subscribe to that kind of faith?
Yep. Yep.
And how many of those do it in the name of Jesus?
Yeah.
I mean, thankfully it's a minority, but Lord have mercy. I don't know how you get, at least Hitler, who considered himself to be religious, a man of faith, sent by God on a divine mission, and by his own interpretation, there were times when he would call himself a Christian. But at least Hitler, when he went to the Passion Play at Oberammergau, afterwards they asked him, "What did you think of it?" And he said, I can't quote exactly, but he said that the scene with Pontius Pilate, who was a true Aryan, lifted the story out of the muck and mire of Jewry. Pontius Pilate lifted the Passion story out of the muck and mire of Jewry. At least Hitler had the honesty to say that. We have all kinds of bloodthirsty groups in this country who call themselves Christian and who, justify their open ideas about violence in the name of Jesus Christ. So, for them, the purpose of Jesus and his cross and resurrection is to give them authority to burn crosses in people's yards. And I'm not making that stuff up. So, it's very easy to twist these things around into whatever kind of twisted approach to the world you and your friends might have.
Yeah, don't you think that all of us plain people at times become so angry about what's going on in different places that we almost wish God would do something And then when we calm down, we know that's not what we
Sure. And, you know, and you can, I'm more than willing to back the level of my rhetoric down a little bit. To say, if we turn that spotlight on ourselves, which that's the whole point of this, right? I mean, we can talk about the Aryan nation, and we can talk about violence in Palestine, and wherever right now, wherever violence is going on in the name of whatever God. But if we turn that spotlight on ourselves, one of the things that comes up is my judgmentalism. I might not be advocating lopping somebody's head off in the name of my God and my faith. But my own Bible that I hold so dear says, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." And it doesn't say it just once in some kind of isolated place. That idea comes up over and over and over again in a number of different places, meaning, Roger, there is a God and it's not you. And God has a job and it's not yours. And you have a job and it's not God's job. You with me? So, one of the things about this story is, I think the reason that it's endured is because all people, all time, all through history, have always liked sexy stuff. Right? The lady, she wasn't caught stealing a candy bar in a drugstore, or she didn't try to skip out on lunch at the Woolworths counter without paying for it. It's adultery. So right away, everybody perks up. Don't lie to me. I know, I'm a pastor. I know about sin. I know what goes on inside of your mind. Every single one of you. So, it's juicy and it gets people's attention. And, you know, the other thing about it is, without asking anybody to do any true confessions right now.
Where is this going?
Here it comes, Sam. Just keep sitting there. How many of you, looking back on your life, would be perfectly comfortable if God came in the room right now and said, "Pastor Roger, pull down the screen. And let's see, I've got a movie here of every person's life, everything that you've ever done."
I'd say just take me now.
And we got a lot of time now, we're gonna watch all of it. Is there anybody that would say, "Take mine first, so I can catch a nap"?
Just to get it over with.
I mean, that's why it says, "Judge not, lest ye be judged."
And yet, we're supposed to stand up for what we believe is right. And there's an element of judgment in that. You're looking at a situation or an event and you're saying, "I don't agree with this," or "I do agree with it," and so you're judging it. So we do have to judge as part of our faith. So there seems to be a discrepancy there in my interpretation.
So you've got a rock that you carry around all the time ready to go.
Yep. But we do have to judge. And you look at the people who were witnessing this happen.
Yeah.
Where was their voice? Were they? Most of the time, we are like sheep. We would simply prefer to not have anything rock the boat. We're humans. We don't like change. We don't like conflict. And that's exactly how Hitler came to power, was everybody just sat back and said, "Oh, not me, it's not affecting me," and just, we try to turn our attention somewhere else. And that's not what we're supposed to do, I don't think.
So, in this case, what would be the righteous thing to do? Pick up a rock and heave it
No, somebody should have stood up with Jesus and said, for example, when I read this, I'm like, okay, where's the guy she was with?
We talked about that before you came
Okay.
in.
And where, is this the first time? Does she have a husband? Where was the husband in all of this? There's never just one person who has the responsibility for actions. We all have, we all impact other people. So, I look at this and it's like, why didn't somebody speak up? And in all of these
Jesus did.
situations- Yeah, Jesus did, and he's the only one who did. I would like to think that somebody else would have, but most of us wouldn't, unfortunately, and I have to put myself in that group most of the time.
I guess I felt that there wasn't anybody else there. It was the people that were ready to throw stones in Jesus, and it never dawned on me that there was anybody else even around.
I don't know that, yeah.
All the
Yeah.
people came to him and sat down, and he began to teach them.
No, the
Okay.
class that was there before. whatever.
Right.
I see, I missed it.
Okay,
Yeah.
I missed it.
And then the scribes and the Pharisees brought in the woman.
good point. I was making an assumption, and I didn't get
Well,
that either.
I get some, I forgot what I'd read ahead of it.
Yeah.
What did you just say? I forgot.
Short-term memory. Short-term memory.
So,
So this has been going on a long time.
yeah.
I'm curious what he was writing in the,
Yeah,
with his finger.
yeah, what was he doing?
We don't know, do we?
Was he just,
There's been a lot of speculation over the centuries. Number of verses from Psalms. There's a verse in Jeremiah that I've marked in my Bible, but I can't remember what the reference is. But there's a verse, there's lots of verses in the Old Testament that basically say, like in the Psalms, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All we like sheep have gone astray, each into their own way. I mean, all of that language is in a bunch of different places in the Old Testament, which I don't think, to Linda's question, I don't think we really take that seriously. I think it's a lot more typical that there's a part of me that wants to stand up for my right to judge and my need to judge, rather than how I live as somebody that knows that I'm in need of God's grace and that I'm sinful every day, all the time. And if I don't think I am, then we need to have a whole nother discussion, because there have been people through the history of Christianity that have said, I don't have anything at all in common with this woman or anybody else that's a sinner. I mean, I'm serious. That's what got Jimmy Swaggart and Jim Bakker and that whole gang in trouble, because their theology says if you really have Jesus in your heart, if you really have the gift of the Holy Spirit, you don't sin.
Oh,
Look it up. Oral Roberts, Jimmy Swaggart, Jim Bakker. I mean, that whole part of Christendom, that's the theology. But we Lutherans,
oh, we don't.
we say we are simultaneously sinners, saints, sinful and justified. Yeah.
Back to that, what did Jesus write in the dirt?
Yeah.
Some time ago, somewhere, I was told that he made just an arc in the dirt up, and then he came down, and the cross was to make the fish. And the symbol of the fish, of course, is Christian.
that's in another place, isn't that after they comes back?
Yeah, I don't know. But he wrote before and after.
Yeah.
So, or maybe like somebody said, he was just doodling. I don't. Okay, all right, let's, what, yeah, okay.
Why did
none of them throw a stone and turn around and walk away?
Well, because I think Jesus had laid down the gauntlet.
Yeah,
Which means that if you throw the stone, you're saying that you're without sin.
right.
Are you willing to do
We're
that?
down there with her, and we can stone you too. But they were all guilty of that, but that was the lesson he was teaching, wasn't it?
Right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You get an A for the day.
I'm simple though.
Okay. All right. Okay, now let's move on. And the chunk that we're going to look at now is 12 through 20. Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Then the Pharisees said to him, You are testifying on your own behalf. Your testimony is not valid. Jesus answered, Even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid because I know where I have come from and where I am going. But you do not know where I come from or where I am going. You judge by human standards, I judge no one. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is valid. For it is not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me. In your law it is written that the testimony of 2 witnesses is valid. I testify on my own behalf, and the Father who sent me testifies on my behalf. Then they said to him, Where is your Father? Jesus answered, You know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. He spoke these words while he was teaching in the treasury of the temple, but no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. Okay, I don't know necessarily what to make of that kind of verbal volley back and forth, but here's just a couple different things that I use by way of handles to try and kind of get a hold of that. When he says, I'm the light of the world, whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. A couple things come to mind. One is, in Genesis, God says, let there be light, and there is light. And so one of the things about the faith of the Old Testament carried into our Christian faith is that God is the source of all light and illumination. Light, literally, literal light, and also symbolically. Remember the old Ford commercial? Ford has a better idea, and the light bulbs over the head. And they had to recall a few vehicles, but it was an image. They have a better idea. So that's epiphany literally is a flash of light, flash of insight. And then faith, in the same way, comes as a gift. And there's a very real sense in which we can probably all testify to the fact that why do you get it and other people don't? Maybe some of you have people in your own family. You're raised in the same kind of home by the same parents, go to the same church, whatever, but you're here and they're not. And there's a lot of different examples. Then Psalm 119 verse 5, and there's other things too. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. That's a verse that a lot of us had to memorize in Sunday school. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Jesus says, I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So the big question is that true for you as a person of faith? If you say that I experience that to be true, I have experienced my faith in Jesus to provide light to the dark places in my life, and I'm grateful for that, then that's your experience. Can anybody else use your experience? I don't think so. I think that's the whole point of all of this obtuse symbolic language. That the way that we know that Jesus is the light of the world is by embracing Jesus in faith. You can't look at it from a distance and say, oh yeah, okay, I see now. Does that make sense? I'm not sure I believe you.
We struggle a lot though.
Uh-huh.
to-
Well,
We can't say, or I can't say, I know that he is the light of the world, but
if we didn't have to struggle with it, would it be faith?
no.
Do we have to struggle with whether or not 2 + 2 = 4?
No.
Oh gosh, I just don't know if it's true or not. I'm saying. But living by faith is living by faith. And some of the situations that we prayed about, isn't that, I mean, that none of us knows what's going to happen day to day. And I talked, my son was in Afghanistan for a tour of duty. And, he was supposed to be sitting in front of a computer and managing the grocery delivery, basically. I mean, there were some bullets and stuff in the groceries. But that, he was in the quartermaster and in headquarters in the colonel's office, supposed to be moving a mouse around on a computer and keeping all of the supplies filled. But the one thing he never told his mother for quite as long as he could keep it secret from her was that he was going out on patrol all the time with the special forces guys. And then they all had to do turns in the guard tower and around the perimeter. And then I had to sit there on the couch with his mother when the news lady at Channel 12 or whatever it was embedded with a film crew in my son's unit over there and said the forward operating base is called Rocket City because the Taliban were always trying to shoot rockets in. So how do you do that? And people would say to me, without knowing, what kind of situation in Afghanistan Trajan was in, but knowing that he was there, what do you do? And I said, every single day, I get on my knees and I put my son in my hands and I offer him up to God. Because that's all I can do. That's all anybody can do. Unless there's some other magic formula that you know that I don't know. But unlike a lot of people, I have a God that I could offer him to. A God that I believe gave him to me in the first place. So, how do you live by faith? That's how you live by faith. And there are people who would say, if you were really a true Christian, you wouldn't have to worry about that at all because bad things would never happen to you. And if you were really a true Christian, you'd never have to worry about what's in your billfold or your pocketbook or your bank account because God would be rewarding you for your faith. But because you're not a true Christian, Roger, you have these concerns. I'm not making it up. I'm just telling you. You don't know how lucky you are to be part of this congregation.
We know that.
At least it's Lutheran. Oh, I'm sorry, that was judgment. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sure you have a serious point, and I'd love to hear it. Didn't you have a? I thought you raised your hand.
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
They raised their hands.
You raised your hands, okay. All right, so now the word judgment in Greek, the word judgment in Greek is crisis spelled with a K. Crisis spelled with a K is judgment in Greek. And what that, you know, when you think about that, what happens when you're in a crisis? What happens when you're in a crisis is everything is on the line. What am I going to do? If I'm driving along and an 18-wheeler decides to change lanes and doesn't see me, that's a crisis in the sense of the Greek word. That's a judgment because who's being judged there? My reflexes, my response, what am I going to do? In this situation of coming into contact with Jesus, it's a crisis because how am I going to react? Am I going to say, like Nicodemus, I want to hear more about what that guy has to say? Are we going to say, that sounds like something that would be good for me? Or, I don't know about that. Or, I want to get together with some of my friends and see if we can't kill him. Which is why I raised the question in the first story about what does it say about your relationship with God? One of my examples, which comes from a previous congregation, is I found out that there were a small group of people who pridefully said that the first thing that they did every Sunday when they came into the sanctuary and sat down was looked around to see how many burned out light bulbs there were. I've used a lot of different hymnals, and you know, in the front, they all have prayers to say before worship. I don't know of any hymnal that's got prayers before worship. Dear God, how many burned out light bulbs do we have here? What does that say about your priorities? If that's the most important thing to you, is that the most important thing to you? If that's the first thing you do when you come into the sanctuary on Sunday morning. What Jesus is saying, I think, is all of us all the time are under judgment by the way we live in the world. That's what I think he's. And then let's go a little bit deeper. And forget the Bible, forget religion, and just ask the question, do you practice what you preach? That is to say, any of us here in this room or anywhere in the world, if we say, well, I don't think it's right, or I think a person should, or I believe blah, 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 then the question is, okay, do you live those values, those beliefs? Do you practice what you preach? I think one of the things the Bible tells us that people don't particularly like to hear is that we all have one standard of behavior for ourselves and another standard of behavior for everybody else. Because I can always excuse myself. If I say something that maybe has an edge to it, well, it was because I was irritated by something else that happened to me, and I can make excuses for myself. But if you look at me cross-eyed, well, who does she think she is? Right? Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Or am I the only one that finds truth in the Bible that applies to me?
It's a struggle all the time.
Okay, thank you. So we have one other person in the room that says she agrees it's a struggle all the time to have one standard of behavior for yourself and one for everybody else. Can I get another witness? All right, there's 3, 4, 5. Okay, good. There's 5 righteous people in this room.
The rest of us are the progress.
You know, in the church that I was at when I was in college, there was a dentist. And he went to dental school at UCLA. And they had practical stuff that they did, the lab part of it, where you actually learn to inflict pain and torment on people. And so he had his guy was a real bugger for details, and like when you're doing bridges and things like that, you know, they had to be just absolutely perfect. The guy was a perfectionist, and your tools and all that stuff had to be absolutely perfect. And then toward the end of dental school, this guy asked Craig to work part-time with him in his office. And so he did, and he said he will never forget, as long as he lived, the first day in that guy's office, he practiced everything that he preached. He didn't just talk about keeping your instruments a certain way and doing certain things by a correct procedure, but he always did that. So, when it comes to how we live, do we practice what we preach? Let's go a little bit further. Again, Jesus said to them, I'm going away, you'll search for me, but you'll die in your sin. Where I'm going, you cannot come. They thought, is he going to kill himself? What's he saying? Where I'm going, you can't come. And then he goes back to that language in chapter 3 with Nicodemus. You are from below, I'm from above. You're of this world, I'm not of this world, which means I'm not rooted in this world. My value system doesn't come from this world. I told you you would die in your sins, for you will die in your sins unless you believe that I'm He. They said to him, who are you? Jesus said to them, why do I speak to you at all? I have much to say about you and much to condemn, but the one who sent me is true, and I declare to the world what I have heard from him. They did not understand what he was speaking to them about the Father, so Jesus said, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will realize that I am He, that I do nothing on my own, but I speak these things as the Father instructed me. And the one who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do what is pleasing to Him. Now, this next verse is just, as he was saying these things, many believed in him. Why? What was it about what he was saying that caused people to believe in him?
They had faith in him.
They had faith in him. Why?
Well, it probably sounded good to them.
You know, this language is going to come up later in chapter 14.
If I had been one of the Jews, I would have been confused too.
Well, and I was going to say, and in chapter 14, the disciples are confused when Jesus is talking about coming and going and show us the Father. Remember that?
Yeah.
We'll get to it in a few weeks. So, I mean, you have these situations where at a certain level, the disciples are confused, but they keep coming around. Remember what Peter said? Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. He doesn't say, everything makes perfect sense to us, Jesus. Don't worry about those guys. They didn't have as high SAT scores as we did. They're all kind of fumbling around. But, all right. Then Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, if you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. They answered him, we are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free? Jesus answered them, very truly I tell you, everyone who commits a sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The son has a place there forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are descendants of Abraham, yet you look for an opportunity to kill me, because there is no place in you for my word. Okay, we had a couple red flags pop up here. What's the first red flag? For $600 in control of the board. We are descendants of Abraham and never been slaves to anyone. Really? Ever read the book of Exodus? And then what about the Babylonians, the Assyrians? What about those other times when you were conquered and carried off into exile?
Right.
Now, think about, again, turn the spotlight around on your own life. Have you ever said anything like this? Well, you didn't, I didn't mean, I meant that I haven't been a slave this week. I meant, when I said I wasn't sinful, I meant I had never killed anybody. I meant I hadn't actually committed adultery when I said I wasn't sinful. Anybody ever done anything like that? Probably not. Just me and Jim? Okay, Stephanie too. 3 of us. So if you can make yourself believe that you've never been a slave, then you can make yourself believe anything, right? So then the second red flag after all of that is, what is real freedom? What is real freedom? Is it possible to be free in your relationship with God even when the Romans occupy your country? Is it possible, like Viktor Frankl said in the book Man's Search for Meaning, to be free even when you're in a Nazi concentration camp? How do you do that?
Your faith has to be pretty darn strong.
And what Viktor Frankl would say is, when you realize that you don't have any other choice, then you die to certain, previous illusions or ideas about, which is what happens when we come to faith with Jesus. It's a death. When you let go, the people who came to faith in Jesus, while certain scribes and Pharisees were resisting it, some of the people had to let go of previous notions they had about what it meant to obey the law of Moses, to be a good Jew, and so on. If we listen to the value system of the world, is that compatible with Jesus saying, turn the other cheek? The value system of the world in general, is Jesus saying, blessed are the peacemakers. Is that compatible?
I don't know.
To follow Jesus, do you have to say no to yourself and yes to God?
Yeah.
I tried to give you a real strong hint on that one. Deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow.
Yeah.
That's what Jesus says. But I don't want to deny myself. Well, you're free to die if you want. But if you want to live, then you need to deny yourself and follow me. Okay. Let's go a little bit further with this whole Abraham thing. Jesus says, I declare that I've seen in the Father's presence. As for you, you should do what you have heard from the Father. They answered him, Abraham is our father. Okay? So, now, this is another example where you say on the one hand, I believe in the law of Moses. Okay, how do you live it? Abraham is our father. Okay, if you are Abraham's children, then you would be doing what Abraham did. But now you are trying to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. This is not what Abraham did. You are indeed doing what your father does. Okay, now, anybody remember Genesis chapter 12, the first 3 verses, the promise to Abraham and Sarah? Anybody here do Bethel Bible series? Okay. Those of you that have done the Bethel Bible series, what's the whole key to the whole Bible according to the Bethel Bible series? What?
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
It was so long ago.
Yeah.
So long ago.
Blessed to be a blessing.
I don't relate it to that.
The whole thing about the promise between Abraham and God, Abraham and Sarah and God, is I'm going to bless you so that in you all the nations of the world will bless themselves. So that you're blessed to be a blessing.
Yeah.
Now, the reason that this is so important, is because the message that we have from the value system of the world and the message that we have out of our own insecurity and selfishness and sinfulness is me first, and as long as I get mine, then that's all that really matters. But in Genesis chapter 12, in the first 3 verses, God says the whole point of getting yours is so that you can bless everybody in the world. Now that's contrary to the value system of the world, and it's contrary to my insecurity and selfishness, isn't it? I'm willing to be taught here if somebody can show me how I'm wrong about Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. So Jesus is saying, if you really are children of Abraham, then what would you be doing? You'd be concerned about being a blessing, right? Because if you know that you're children of Abraham, that's a blessing. How many of you know that song? Father Abraham and many sons. You haven't read a book, you haven't seen a movie, you don't know the song. It's a tough crowd. Wow. Well, Father Abraham had many sons, and I am one and you are one.
No?
We're all children of Abraham. That Sunday school song. And so we're blessed to know. Another version is Rock of My Soul in the Bosom of
Oh,
Abraham.
yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jesus. Now, where does that come from? Rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham, because Dives, the rich guy, or Divus, however you want to pronounce his name, he is in torment in hell because he stepped over Lazarus on his way in and out of his mansion. And now Lazarus is in Abraham's bosom in paradise. Rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham. That's a blessing. And so we're supposed to bless others with that. Okay. Let's jump to verse 51 and come in for a landing. We know that, they want to go tit for tat with Jesus. He questions their pedigree. They claim to be children of Abraham. Jesus says, do you act like it? And so they want to question his pedigree and say that he's a Samaritan, illegitimate. It's a way of calling him a bastard and the son of a demon. And, you know, the idea is that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and the idea is in the ancient world it was pretty much assumed that you would you'd go into the Father's business. Whatever your dad did is what you would do. You know, we got a lot of last names, Clark, Miller, and so on, out of our Anglo-Saxon tradition that had to do with groups of people, families that had the same occupation generation after generation. So, verse 51 says, "Very truly I tell you, whoever keeps my word will never see death." The Jews said to him, "Now we know that you have a demon. Abraham died, and so did the prophets, yet you say, whoever keeps my word will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham who died?" Now, if you go back to Genesis again, the serpent was the most crafty animal in the garden. Came to Eve and said, I guess God won't let you eat anything in the garden. No, we can eat anything we want. We just have to stay away from the one tree. And the serpent says, oh, well, that's because God knows if you eat the fruit off that one tree, you'll be like God. He said, no, God said, we'll die. The serpent said, you won't die. God just doesn't want you to have any fun. God wants to hog all the God job for himself. So, Adam and Eve eat the fruit. Do they die? Yes.
Yeah.
Do they die? No. Do they die? Yes. Because their eyes were open and they're ashamed that they're naked and so on. They die in their relationship with God. They die in their relationship with each other. They die in their relationship to themselves. Isn't this exactly what Jesus is saying?
Yeah.
I'm come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. If I glory in myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, he of whom you say he is our God, though you do not know him, but I know him. If I would say that I do not know him, I would be a liar like you. Very truly, I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. So they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. So there's a lot of stone throwing. And, you know, here we are, the 8th chapter of the Gospel of John, and, you know, we're about a third, maybe a little over a third of the way through. And it's out in the open that people want Jesus dead. They want him dead. My faith in God tells me that Jesus needs to die. So, does my faith in Jesus tell me that people need to die? If I'm going to follow Jesus, are there people that need to die? Is there room in the gospel of Jesus for a list of people who need to die?
They talk about die to sin, but not die.
But they're talking about Jesus needs to die. Because we're going to shut him up for good, right?
Yeah.
He thinks he's so smart.
But he doesn't need to die.
What?
He does need to die for our sins.
Well, and that's the Gospel of John will say that they, without knowing it, they inadvertently fulfill prophecy and God's plan. Okay. Any questions or comments? I know we did a lot of dense material today. There's no denying that.
We really appreciate it
Well, thank you.
very much.
Thank you very much. Next week is chapter 9, The Man Born Blind, and that's one really long story. But this was really dense. There's these passages where Jesus talks a lot, and at times it's just like one riddle after another.
It's like it was way up here.
Yeah, yeah.
There was a real juxtaposition of that to go from the woman charged with adultery, which was a very basic, grounded imagery section, to right into that very esoteric above my head. It's like, whoa.
And that might explain why that story got stuck in there as time went by. It turned up from somewhere and somebody said, maybe we need a little break
Lighten it
here.
up a bit. Okay.
Huh.
No, it was getting kind of dense.
Yeah.
Is it possible that she was not guilty of it?
The woman caught in the very act of adultery?
That they're all lying?
Well, it could
Because
be.
women had no rights
Right.
at that time.
Sure.
Yeah.
She maybe was not guilty at all.
Yep. One of my favorite cartoons of all time. I shouldn't tell you this, but I will anyway. One of my favorite cartoons